Welcome back with another video. Today my top 50 favorite movies or films of all time. This is basically first and foremost a music related channel, but like everybody else on this planet, I also do have favorite movies, and today I'm going to try to rank them, like always with those, especially those huge lists, like a top 50, those things, those positions, they can change daily, Next week's list would maybe be not vary, but slightly different from today's. My number 50, I'm not a big fan of horror movies, so there's not going to be a lot of horror movies in today's list. But number 50 is The Fly, and I'm talking about the 1986 version by David Cronenberg, directed by David Cronenberg, with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. And as an honorable mention, two more horror movies, also from the 80s. So my triarchy of favorite 80s horror movies that would be completed by An American Werewolf in London by John Landis and Cat People. Number 49 is a movie I think I've only watched once. There's a couple of movies on today's list that I never ever have rewatched. It's La Vita è Bella. I don't know what the English, maybe Life is Beautiful, probably, that's the translation. I don't know if that's really was the title in America and England, but that movie with and by Roberto Benigni, comedy, but sad, dark, tragic comedy, because Holocaust subject gets tackled in the movie. And that's the reason why I've only watched it once, because I watched it together with my girlfriend, and it's really hard for her to watch those kinds of movies with that kind of subject matter, and it's not the kind of movie it's like a 3-hour movie that I'm going to watch alone on my own. Usually, since I'm together with my girlfriend, we watch movies together, but she doesn't really want to watch it again. I can understand it in a way, but it's a beautifully shot movie and great performances. La Vita è Bella. 48 is maybe the exact opposite of the previous movie. It's also comedy, but this time there's no sad under or overtone. It's Dirty Rotten Scoundrels from the 80s with Michael Caine and Steve Martin in it. It's a hilariously funny, like a screwball comedy, and it takes place in one of my favorite holiday places or places in the world, the Côte d'Azur. I know this movie since I'm a kid, and I think my love for the Côte d'Azur and for doing my holidays often there, maybe was kind of initiated by that movie. Number 47, I once ranked his complete filmography on this channel, David Lynch. It's his movie Wild at Heart, starring Nicolas Cage. Very wild, funny, also terrifying in certain aspects. Typically Lynchian road movie, and one of his most fun movies. One of his, it's maybe not compared with other mainstream movies a very easily digestible movie, but compared with other Lynch movies, it's one of his easiest, I would say. Wild at Heart. 46. Again, a bit of an opposite to the previous one I was talking about. This time it's Gladiator by Ridley Scott. Big, action-packed historical drama. I'm a history geek, and like most history geeks, I'm also a bit obsessed by the Roman Empire and also the Republic before that. So this is my kind of movie. Great movie. Number 45, Midnight Run, I think, from 1987. It's a movie that's slightly forgotten. It's one of the most entertaining, 80s action movies. And it's also kind of a road movie starring Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin. It's an action comedy, I would say. It's a buddy movie, it's like those movies from the late 80s, Lethal Weapon, The Hard Way, and so on. But it's my favorite of those movies. It's a bit underappreciated, but it's really such a fun movie. Number 44, also like Midnight Run, it has run in its title. It's The Running Man, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, from my country, Austria. you know, I think it's also one of the movies that Arnold himself didn't really like, and it's usually not seen as one of his biggest achievements, but it's one of my favorite. I think it's my second favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. There will be one, or maybe two. I think there will be two more Arnold Schwarzenegger movies on the list, but no, therefore it's my third favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. A very fun science fiction movie, but again with dark undertones. You know, it's a satire. It's basically it's one of those movies. Almost everything the movie kind of predicted came true in a way. Next one, 43, is a bit the same subject as Running Man, but from a completely different perspective. It's Quiz Show, directed by Robert Redford, starring Ralph Fiennes. It's more like a small movie. Actors can show off. It's a lot about the dialogue, and it's a kind of based on a true story movie. It's about the first big scandal in TV. You know, Running Man is about big scandals in TV of the future, and Quiz Show is from the beginning stages of TV. You know, it takes place in the mid-50s when everything was clean cut and honest and so on, and it shows behind the curtain about the dirty aspects of the media and television. So therefore, in a kind of way, it has a similar subject as Running Man, but it's a much more serious and thoughtful movie, I would say. Next one, that's again an Arnold movie, and it's again a very underappreciated Arnold movie that no one talks about. It's his first bigger role, or maybe his first real Hollywood acting role, but he's like the third biggest character in the movie. Jeff Bridges and Sally Field are the two leads. It's a movie by Bob Rafelson. It's a new Hollywood movie. It's not an 80s action movie, it's a 70s new Hollywood movie, and it's called Stay Hungry. 41 is again a kind of a forgotten new Hollywood movie. It's Fun with Dick and Jane, starring Jane Fonda. Again, one of her most underappreciated and forgotten movies from a time when she was a big star, but this movie is like under the radar nowadays. And again, like many movies we've had so far, it's a bit of a satire and also a bit of a media satire. It's a bit the same critique that movies like Natural Born Killers or Fight Club had many decades later, but in a more fun, in a more 70s and fun way, I would say. It's a comedy first and foremost. Next one is not a comedy. It's again a dark subject matter. It again takes place in World War II. It's called Eye of the Needle with Donald Sutherland. It's a very suspenseful thriller, and the thrilling thing about it is, there's not really a protagonist. The antagonist is the hero or the anti-hero of the movie. So we see this movie through the eyes or through the perspective of the character that Donald Sutherland is playing, but he's definitely not the good guy. He's a Nazi spy, and it's a very clever Nazi espionage movie. I'm not sure if it's based on a true story, but certain aspects of it certainly are, and it's like the real James Bond, but playing for the other team, so to speak. And it's a very dark and claustrophobic, paranoid suspense thriller, very Hitchcockian in a way. Number 39. Again, like Gladiator, it's a big, overblown movie. Usually, that wouldn't be really something for me, but I just like, the cinematography of it, the camera work and landscapes in it. It's The English Patient. It's a bit like a rip of Lawrence from Arabia, but it's from the 1990s, and it's a big epic movie. Some could say it's a bit boring and it's a bit pretentious, but again, it's not really the story for me. And again, it's a movie starring Ralph Fiennes, like Quiz Show, whereas Quiz Show was a very smallish movie. This is a grand movie, like from the old golden Hollywood days, but made in the 90s. But really, it's the cinematography and the locations and the escapist adventure aspect, going to very exotic, interesting places. And again, it takes place during World War II, and the protagonist is the antagonist, and Ralph Fiennes is like a spy for the Nazis in a way, or isn't he? That's the question of the movie. Is he a spy or isn't he a spy? So also has something in common with Eye of the Needle in a way. As you can see, I like characters that are gray. I'm not really a big fan of these black and white kind of protagonist-antagonist movies. Number 38 is Boyhood by Richard Linklater. That's a very interesting film with a kind of experimental premise. A movie that could have turned out pretentious, but isn't pretentious. It's really the emotions it tries to evoke authentic emotions. It's not too artsy fartsy, but the concept sounds very artsy fartsy because it's a movie that was shot, for like 10 years. The duration of the production was like 10 years on and off because it's called Boyhood. It follows a boy growing into a man. I don't know exactly, but it starts like when he's a little boy, like 6, 7, 8 years old, and it ends when he's like 18 years old. And it was really shot with the same actors and the same child actor as he was growing up. Ethan Hawke is the male lead, who's very, very often the male lead in Richard Linklater movies. As you will see, I love Richard Linklater movies, and this is one of his best. Number 37, an Italian movie, like La Vita è Bella, again an Italian movie. It's called Il Postino. Maybe it was called Postman in English, because that would be the translation. It's the same thing as with La Vita è Bella and An English Patient. I love the cinematography in it. It really has a beauty. It's a really a beautiful, very poetic movie, I would say. Then number 36, U-Turn, my favorite Oliver Stone movie. That's a movie that, no one seems to like except me. It's usually not seen as one of the better Oliver Stone movies. It's, like from after he became, after his big successes in the late 80s, early 90s, this is already from the phase when most critics say he kind of lost it. But I really like that movie. It's with Sean Penn and Jennifer Lopez, and that sounds like it can't be any good, the combination of all those people. But it's a really great fish out of water story. It's a modern western. It's a bit like it's a serious version of the 1991 Michael J. Fox movie Doc Hollywood. It's the same thing, but in a serious way, if you know what I mean. 35, one of the weirdest movie on the list, Listomania from the mid-70s. That's one of those weird Ken Russell movies. Ken Russell, one of the most eccentric directors of all time, and it's a rock and roll movie in a way. It stars Roger Daltrey of The Who as Liszt, the classical composer Liszt, and lots of cameos by other rock stars, including Ringo Starr as the Pope. Ringo Starr plays the Pope in that movie, and that's I guess all you need to know about that movie. Weird, psychedelic, awesome 70s movie. Number 34 is a Bond movie. I'm a Bond fan in a way. I like the escapism aspects of some Bond movies, and one of my favorites is Thunderball from 1965. That's really classic Bond. I think Goldfinger, which is even more iconic, more classic Bond from that era, is a bit too overhyped in a way for me. Thunderball is like the little brother of Goldfinger, although it was even more successful at the time. Goldfinger became more and more iconic, but when they were released, Thunderball actually was the most successful of all the Bond movies, adjusted for inflation. And yeah, it's a fantastic escapist action adventure movie of the 60s. And it's probably the first Bond movie that really got that 60s essence, that 60s style. Before that, it was still the early 60s that felt a bit like the 50s. Number 33, again, one of those movies I only watched once. I think it's one of those movies you only need to watch once, and I think it's one of those, if I would rewatch it, probably I wouldn't like it as much. I think it's one of those lightning in a bottle movies that works on the first viewing the most. It's I Heart Huckabees, a movie starring, it's a big cast with lots of stars, but I seem to remember Mark Wahlberg is in it, Dustin Hoffman. I think it's from the late 90s or even early 90s. A strange movie, very surreal, and I like those kind of movies. Number 32, Robin Hood, King of Thieves with Kevin Costner. That's my favorite Robin Hood movie. Like I said, I'm a history nerd, and I also like medieval history, of course. I like castles, I like swords, I like all that stuff, knights and so on. And I like myths, and the Robin Hood myth, of course, also. And this movie, got a bit ridiculed at the time, or even nowadays. It's not, a criticism of it often is it's not very realistic. But what do people even mean by that? Robin Hood, the myth itself isn't realistic. It's a made-up story. Maybe based on some kernels of truth somewhere, but it's basically a fairy tale. So what does this mean? It's not very authentic. It's not supposed to be authentic. It's the same as people who complain about certain Game of Thrones episodes when something is not authentic. It's a fantasy story. What's wrong with you? I think it's a very entertaining retelling of the Robin Hood myth. Number 31, The Rattles, All You Need Is Cash. Maybe the best spoof movie. Maybe, because I think I have one even higher up in this ranking. One of the best spoof movies of all time. And the great thing about the Rattles movie is it spoofs something that wasn't even released at that time. It's a spoof of the career of the Beatles, but really it's a spoof of the Beatles anthology. And the Rattles movie came out, I think, in 1976 or 77, and the Beatles anthology came out in the mid-90s. But the reason why that was possible is, of course, the Monty Pythons, including Eric Idle, who was responsible for the Rattles, were big friends with George Harrison, and George Harrison provided them with all that material that the Beatles already had collected by the early 70s, all that video footage that later would become the anthology. So it's really brilliant to have a fake Beatles documentary even before the real Beatles documentary came out, and it's a fantastic movie when you're a Beatles fan. So many little details. You can really tell that Eric Idle was first of all an insider through his friendship with George Harrison, but also a huge Beatle fan. It's a very respectful parody. Number 30 is, I said I didn't have many horror movies on the list. This is one. It's Rosemary's Baby. I really like that psychological, paranoia kind of horror style, and yeah, it's a fantastic movie. It takes place in the Dakota building, a building I just visited a couple of months ago. I've made a video about it. My visit was more related to John Lennon and his history with the building. But yeah, it's an iconic movie for me alone for the fact that the Dakota building is in it, and it's a great story, greatly directed by Robert Polanski, and Mia Farrow is awesome in it, and all the actors, all the main actors, also the evil Satanist guys, they're all awesome in that movie. 29, another Bond, and this time, really a ridiculed Bond, but unfairly ridiculed Bond. It's Octopussy, one of the most underrated Bond movies, not amongst Bond hardcore fans. I think Bond hardcore fans know that despite the hilarious movie title, this is actually a great spy thriller. And it's my favorite Roger Moore James Bond movie. 28, Fight Club. Again, it's one of those media or society satire movies like Fun with Dick and Jane and Running Man, all those kind of movies. I seem to resonate with those movies that critique, certain aspects of Western modern culture. And Fight Club does this in a very entertaining way. And especially both of the lead actors, Edward Norton and Brad Pitt, fantastic performances by them. 27, I said Rattles is one of my favorite spoof movies of all time. My favorite spoof movie of all time is Spaceballs. I grew up with it. I think I've seen Spaceballs even before I ever seen a Star Wars movie and a Star Trek movie. I mean, I was familiar with the TV show Star Trek, but never seen a Star Trek movie or Alien or a Star Wars movie, so I was familiar with the spoof before the thing happened, and I will always love it. It's my favorite Mel Brooks movie. 26, since we had the English Patient, we also, we have to have the original, the thing that's like the blueprint for what English Patient is paying homage to. It's Lawrence from Arabia, that's from the big, iconic Classic Hollywood movies, one of my favorites. Again, it's the cinematography and the feel, you know, that opulent, elegant vibe of that movie, and the slowness. You know, I really like also movies that take the time and immerse you slowly, and you know, that's Lawrence from Arabia. 4 hours in the desert. 25 is Being John Malkovich. Again, a movie I maybe only seen once or twice. Again, I think it's a movie probably once, you know, you're familiar with the twist in it, and you know, it's always those movies with something when there's one strange thing that happens and that changes everything, and it becomes surreal. Those are the kind of movies I think that are best watched once or twice, and I think I watched Being John Malkovich once or twice, and I was very entertained by it. Awesome concept for a movie. You know, fourth wall breaking movies usually aren't my kind of thing, but this is the one fourth wall breaking movie that I really can get behind. 24, They Live, my favorite John Carpenter movie. This is also fourth wall breaking in the way that the premise of the movie is that someone with can look behind, you know, reality or fake reality with his sunglasses. You know, it's a very simple and absurd premise, but again, it serves as a plot device for a media satire, and again a satire of us, of our Western civilization and corruptness and so on. And it's also a great movie if you're a conspiracy theorist, and you know, I was always interested in conspiracy theories, so I really like John Carpenter's take on it. Number 23, one of my all-time favorite comedies, The Money Pit, with Tom Hanks, of course. That was the time when Tom Hanks was good, when he was at his best, I would say. You know, he wasn't really taken seriously as an actor, and especially as a character actor in the 80s. He was more like a you know, he was a screwball slapstick comedian in a way, and you know, in the 90s he became more and more serious, and therefore for me more and more boring. But you know, he had this anarchistic energy in his 80s movies, and The Money Pit is my favorite of those. And I even like the side story of the movie, because I work in the music business, and the side story, which I think most people will not even notice, but he's a lawyer who's working in the rock and roll pop industry, and I think whoever wrote the script, you know, he must have had some really good insights into how these things really work. So really great comedy. And number 22 is a trilogy. You know, trilogies that are connected with each other, I will rank as one, you know, body of work, because how do you rank the second or third part of a three-part thing? And it's Richard Linklater again. It doesn't even really have a name, that trilogy. It's the Before Sunset, Before Sunrise, After Midnight, you know, those movies with Julie Delpy and again Ethan Hawke. It's almost the same. It's not the same, but it's a related concept to the Boyhood concept, in the sense that it follows people and you age with the people. You know, it's like you grow up or old with people. You know, the first movie was filmed in the 90s in my hometown Vienna, and shows two people in their 20s falling in love. The second movie is when they're in their 30s, and the fourth movie is, I think, in their 40s, when they have, you know, problems in their marriage. 21 is one of my favorite Woody Allen movies, Play It Again, Sam, from the early 70s. It's a clear predecessor to the much more famous Annie Hall. I prefer it to Annie Hall. It's almost like Annie Hall was a remake, a reboot of this movie done by Woody a couple of years later. But I prefer Play It Again, Sam, which is maybe a bit more gritty. It's not as polished as Annie Hall, but you know, I prefer it. You know, with Woody Allen movies, it's first and foremost the dialogue, and I prefer the dialogue and Play It Again, Sam. Number 20, now my favorite Bond movie. I once ranked all Bond movies, all 25 Bond movies, so it's no surprise to anyone who watched that video. If you want to know what I like about that movie, just watch that Bond movie ranking video. It's The Living Daylights by 1987. Timothy Dalton, and I think the best portrayal ever of the James Bond character. Number 19, Fargo by the Coen Brothers. That's one of my favorite Coen Brothers movies, and you know, it works as a comedy, as a black comedy. It has hilarious scenes in it, but it also works as a serious crime story and as a thriller. That's really the awesome thing about that movie. You can watch it and just laugh at the absurd stuff that happens in it, but you also can, or maybe even should, take it serious. You know, the actors in it play their parts deadpan, in a deadpan way. You know, like those are really dangerous things that are happening to them, and it's really great acting and a great script. Number 18, The Graduate. You know, that's of coming of age stories, probably my favorite Hollywood coming of age story. That's the classic. I'm 18, you know, from a male perspective. I'm 18, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Asking those questions movie. And since it takes place in an era that is very interesting to me in a pop cultural sense, you know, the late 60s, the hippie era, of course it's very interesting to me, and I love that movie. Number 17, again a kind of horror movie, but it also, you know, could also be seen as a science fiction movie. It's a science fiction horror movie, let's put it that way. And again, Ridley Scott, therefore I guess Ridley Scott is one of my all-time favorite directors. It's Alien from 1979. You know, there's some Ridley Scott movies I really think are terrible. Usually he needs a good script. Usually he's not really into scripts that much, I think, and into the story. He's a very visual director. So if he has a good script to work with, and especially if he has a small script, like Alien, first part of Alien is kind of a small movie, and that for the most part takes place in one room, in one spaceship. You know, he's best at that because his strengths, you know, the visual storytelling, you know, that's always good with him. But he needs, you know, a clear, smallish kind of concept, and therefore Alien is maybe not my favorite Ridley Scott movie. There's going to be one later on, but this is like the perfect Ridley Scott movie. That's the perfect kind of movie for him to make. You know, Gladiator is an exception where a big movie worked, but all his other big historical epics, you know, they fail because the dialogue is often so cringe, so pretentious, so artificial. And when he has the chance to really self-indulge himself, then, you know, it can get over the top and a bit too much for me. Number 16 is maybe the most hilarious thing on the list, but, you know, this is a childhood memory, a youth memory. My favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. You know, I'm from Austria, so I have to have Arnold in there several times. But this is going to be my favorite Arnold movie. It's Red Sonja, which is probably the movie he himself hates the most of all his movies. All three Arnold movies in this list are probably the top 3 movies that he himself hated the most making, and where he thinks these are my 3 worst movies ever. And Red Sonja, I think, is his all-time the worst movie he ever did, according to himself, and also according to most of his fans. But I grew up with that movie. You know, I've seen that movie before I watched the Conan movies, so I never compared them. You know, when you watched Conan before, you will always say, Conan is maybe the more stylistically better telling of the same story. But, you know, I was like 10 years old. You know, I would have been too young for Conan. But, you know, the more popcorn kind of Red Sonja was the exactly right thing for me at the time. And, you know, I had a crush when I was 10, 11, 12 years old on Brigitte Nielsen, you know, Red Sonja. But besides that, you know, I watched that movie even when I was grown up several times. I still think it's very underrated. If you like those kind of sword and sorcery movies, you have to like them. It's very underrated because it has a killer soundtrack, you know, a great Ennio Morricone score. Camera work is brilliant. And the story is basically the same as Conan. So if you like the story of Conan, why don't you like the story of Red Sonja? I think it's a great movie. Number 15 is Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles. You know, it's their weird psychedelic TV special home movie kind of movie. It was deemed the first flop they ever produced, but it was deemed a flop, I think, first and foremost because it didn't work with a broad audience. You know, they showed it on TV on Christmas Day in England, Christmas 1967, when, you know, all the families and grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, aunts, they all sat in front of the TV together and wanted to watch something easy and nice. And then then this movie comes along, a very weird experimental psychedelic movie. So no, it wasn't really a flop in an artistic sense, I would say. It was just the wrong movie for the wrong people. But I really think it's great, and it really shows you more about the genius of the Beatles than all the other Beatle movies, because in all the other Beatle movies they just, you know, act from a script that someone else has written and they are directed by someone else. And in Yellow Submarine it's not even their own voices, you know, acting, speaking the characters, the cartoon characters. But Magical Mystery Tour is really by them, with them and by them. And, you know, since I'm such a big Beatle fan, I have to like it, and I do like it. Number 14 is again one of those movies like They Live or maybe even Fight Club and things like that. These surreal, what is real, what isn't real, is there conspiracy kind of movies, and therefore one of my favorites of that kind. It's Sardos, however you pronounce it, with Sean Connery, the weirdest Sean Connery movie of all time. You know, I really have huge respect for Sean Connery. That after this was one of the first movies he did after he finished James Bond. I've got huge respect that he made this movie after the Bond movies. It really shows you that he wanted to grow as an artist, and also that he kind of wanted to destroy the myth, destroy him as a mainstream pop culture icon. It's a bit his Plastic Ono Band. What for John Lennon was the album Plastic Ono Band, you know, destroying the Beatle myth. This is like Sean Connery, you know, saying fuck you to the Bond movies and all those more mainstreamy movies he did before that. And yeah, it asks really great questions. I'm also a fan of the director John Borman. This is the only John Borman movie on the list, but I also like many other of his movies. You know, he has really these kind of he has really a talent for bringing mythological concepts and psychological concepts to life in his movies, and Sardos is, in my opinion, his best movie. Number 13 is a movie that was maybe influenced by Sardos, although not many people are aware of that. It's Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, but the extended versions. I much prefer the extended versions to the cinema versions. I think Peter Jackson took a lot of influence, maybe not from Sardos, but from another John Borman movie, from Excalibur, which, you know, if this would be a top 100, Excalibur would be my top 100 favorite movies. I think Lord of the Rings or Peter Jackson took lots of inspiration from John Borman, and especially a movie like Excalibur. You know, the way that landscapes are filmed and so on. That's very, very Borman-esque, one could say. And, you know, Lord of the Rings, I'm a fantasy geek, so I have to have it very high in this list. Number 12 is my favorite Woody Allen movie, Love and Death. Takes place during the Napoleonic Wars from a Russian perspective, so really weird setting, and Woody is a Russian guy, and Diane Keaton, as often in those early 70s Woody movies, is also in it, and she's great. They have such a great comedic chemistry and comedic timing with each other. One can tell that they really respected each other a lot. You know, they also were a couple back in the day. I think it's his most funny movie. You know, this is a pure comedy. You know, later on Woody Allen movies would try to be more and more artistic, which is also fine. You know, despite his personal life, I'm not going to comment on that, but as a filmmaker, he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and also the more serious stuff later on. But, you know, Love and Death is one of the best comedies, pure comedies ever made, in my opinion, and it's my favorite Woody Allen movie. Number 11, missing out on the top 10, is Boogie Nights by P.T. Anderson. And for entertainment value, it would deserve a place in my top 10, maybe even top 5. But it's only number 11 because it's, this P.T. Anderson in the beginning of his career had in common with Quentin Tarantino. That's also the reason why there's no Quentin Tarantino movie, although they're all very entertaining. And I respect him as a guy. But no movie by him is in this list because they're pastiches, they're like, or sampling, those are this typical 90s movie aesthetic, also music aesthetic in the 90s, of sampling beats. Oh, I like this from the 70s, I take this from the 60s and I mix it together. And Boogie Nights is really a pastiche of maybe even greater movies like Saturday Night Fever, and it's not that original in that sense, but the way it's directed, the acting, the story itself, the script, the camera work again, which seems to be an important thing for me, cinematography, and how it pulls you into this time, into this era, late 70s, early 80s. In that sense, it's almost a perfect movie. If you're into that kind of stuff, late 70s sleazy pop culture, which I am, this is almost a perfect movie. But since it lacks a bit of, artistic originality or integrity even, it can't be in the top 10, but it's my number 11. Number 10 is Blade Runner. And which cut? There's several cuts, and there's not the perfect cut. It's my 10th favorite movie, but still there's no perfect cut. The potential would have even been bigger for this movie. I decided to go with the so-called final cut. I don't know if it remains the final cut or if it is in fact the final cut. Maybe they did even a cut after that, but it's called the final cut. And Blade Runner, probably my favorite pure science fiction movie, and again, a movie that raises interesting, nowadays even more so, like Running Man, it became more and more relevant, interesting questions about how we want to live as a society. Blade Runner was released in 1982, the year I was born, but it asks questions about artificial intelligence and how do we interact with artificial intelligence. So very ahead of its time. And again, Ridley Scott, it's my favorite Ridley Scott movie. The cinematography is probably one of the most stunning looking, most beautifully looking movies of all time. It often gets criticized, and Ridley Scott in general, for a bit of a slick, too clean, too sterile look, too cold maybe. But for what it wants to be, it plays in it takes place in a dystopian future. It is exactly the right thing for what it wants to be, and yeah, you really get lost in that world with that movie. Number 9, probably my favorite comedy of all time. Love and Death was my favorite Woody Allen comedy, but this is probably my favorite comedy of all time. It's the second time we've had the Coen Brothers in that ranking. It's The Big Lebowski. That's maybe also the most rewatchable movie of all time. I told you there are movies like A Hard Huckabees that I only watched once because I think they only really work when you're surprised by what they are. But Big Lebowski is the exact opposite. You can watch it at least once a year, and it will always it only gets better and better for some strange reason. It's really a trip. It's not really about what it's about. It's not really about the content. Maybe the content doesn't even really have that much substance, but it's really what Quentin Tarantino used to call a hangout movie. That's my perfect hangout movie. Number 8, that's the other rewatchable thing on the list, next to Big Lebowski, maybe the most rewatchable thing on the list. And again, it's a childhood thing. This is more like a movie that you enjoy mostly when you're a child, but still as a grown-up I have those memories, and I will always have some fondness in my heart. It's the Back to the Future trilogy, again like with Lord of the Rings or the Richard Linklater thing. I'm counting it as one thing, because how do you rank it when you take out one of those 3 parts? As a standalone movie, of course, the first would be the best, but that's one of those franchises that really needed to be, that the world wouldn't be as there would be something that's lacking in the world without a Back to the Future 2 and 3. So I'm glad Zemeckis made parts 2 and 3. Number 7, to have my all-time favorite actress also somewhere in this ranking. It's Le Mépris. What was it called in English? I think Contempt. 1963, Jean-Luc Godard with Brigitte Bardot. You know, she's my favorite actress of all time. She's to me the most charismatic person of the 20th century that I know of, and she's at her peak in a way as an icon in this movie. And the movie is almost a love letter or love-hate letter by Jean-Luc Godard to Brigitte Bardot. I think she didn't really like working with Godard that much. He was a bit too pseudo-intellectual for her. And I can see that, you know, the movie is a bit pretentious, like many Godard movies. As a director from the Nouvelle Vague, I prefer Truffaut to Godard, who's, in my opinion, less pretentious. But it's an iconic movie. It's a beautifully looking movie, not just Brigitte Bardot, but also the landscapes. I think they filmed it on Capri, the island near Naples. Going to visit Capri in 2 weeks, by the way, for the first time. And yeah, I really love that movie. Number 6, my favorite Beatle movie isn't Magical Mystery Tour. You know, it was my number 15, I think, and that's the Beatle movie I respect the most, Magical Mystery Tour, because of the involvement of the Beatles themselves. And now you all will think my number 6 is going to be A Hard Day's Night, but I have to disappoint you. I prefer the much maligned follow-up movie Help. I think Help is more fun, it's more 60s. Like I said with Thunderball, you know, the 60s in movies really started to set in 1965. 1964 was still this, you know, this black and white world in a way, and from 1965 onwards, it's really that 60s vibe. And Help is therefore the most Austin Powers kind of Beatle movie, and you know, I like those colorful 60s movies. Number 5, that's maybe the most unknown movie to most of you on today's list. It's called It Couldn't Happen Here. I think it must have been from 1988, 87, 88. It's what Help and A Hard Day's Night were for the Beatles. It's that for the Pet Shop Boys. You know, the Pet Shop Boys were so big in England, and maybe also in Europe in general, in the late 80s, that they really thought we will have now our own movie in the style of A Hard Day's Night or Help, and it's surprisingly brilliant. You know, not many people talk about this movie anymore. I think it didn't also get too good reviews back in the day. I think people were expecting something different, maybe, but it's such a weird movie, and if you're a Pet Shop Boys fan, you will love it. You know, at least for the musical content. Those are like big music videos for songs from the album. Actually, first and foremost, and a bit of introspective also. But I also like the dialogue scenes in between. I think it's a hilarious movie, and you know, it has this British. It's a very British movie, and I love it. I would even love it without the music and without the Pet Shop Boys. If it would just be a straight, you know, like a road movie. It's like a road movie, but the British version of a road movie. So it's a road movie with bicycles instead of cars for the most part of it. There's also cars in it. Bicycles, trains, and cars. Number 4, and I told you the reasons why Boogie Nights is only number 11. Number 4 is kind of the original, where Boogie Nights took a lot of, let's say, inspiration from. It's Saturday Night Fever. It's one of the most misunderstood movies of all time, in my opinion, because of the Bee Gees involvement and disco and also the kind of guy John Travolta nowadays or the past 30 years is kind of seen of, and you know, songs that are almost like memes, like Staying Alive. Many people mistake this for a fun romp, a disco musical to have a good time, popcorn movie. It is also that, you know, it also has all those elements. You know, if you just like disco music and you like to watch people dance to awesome Bee Gees disco songs, it will work for you. but it won't be probably your number 4 favorite movie of all time. But I think it's also, besides all that, that's like the selling point, the disco thing, which was so big at the time when it came out. But it's also a really gritty, serious new Hollywood movie that, you know, talks about real hard questions, you know, and it's also about working class life versus, you know, middle class life, and the aspirations of someone from the working class versus the aspirations of someone from middle to upper class, and the way it shows New York in a very interesting time for New York, the way it shows Brooklyn and Manhattan, and also what differentiates Brooklyn from Manhattan. That was very interesting, you know. If you're familiar with my channel, you know that I visited New York for the first time a couple of months ago, and next to visiting the Dakota building, and, you know, because of John Lennon and so on, my main interest was to, you know, to get that Saturday Night Fever vibe. You know, it's not really there any longer in New York the way it used to be. I guess, you know, New York has been cleaned up in the past decades. But, you know, I still could feel the vibe. You know, I was also in Brooklyn, in that area where most of the movie takes place. You know, Manhattan is only like 20% of the movie, but 80% is in Bayside, Brooklyn, and, you know, I got the vibe, and I think it's a gritty vibe. I think it's the better Taxi Driver. You know, it's 1 year after Taxi Driver. You know, it's like a bit like a mix of Rocky 1, which also was the year before, and Taxi Driver, and I prefer it to both movies. It combines the best of both elements. You know, it combines more the desperation and the more pessimistic things from Taxi Driver with the more aspirational things from Rocky, and I dare you to watch it again if you still think it's just that funny disco musical. Number 3, now a movie by my all-time favorite director, I would say. We already had one movie of his already in that ranking, David Lynch. My number 3 favorite movie of all time is Mulholland Drive. You know, I keep it short because I already did a all David Lynch movies ranked video once on my channel. Just watch that video if you want to find out why I like Mulholland Drive so much. It's, you know, it's a masterpiece. It's probably the biggest cinematic masterpiece of the 21st century so far for me. It's so big, you know, not in terms of budget and action, but in how dense it tells a story, but at the same time also how indulgent, you know. It's dense and vast at the same time, and it's the dark kind of hangout movie. Like Big Lebowski is a fun hangout movie, and Mulholland Drive is a disturbing hangout movie to me, and very, you know, it's really psychedelic kind of film, and the best film I think ever done about, you know, about dream states. You know, it's the typical Lynch thing. You know, by the way, if I would rank TV shows, Twin Peaks would be my second favorite TV show. Since I'm such a fantasy nerd, Game of Thrones is of course my all-time favorite TV show, especially the first 4 seasons, of course. Number 2 is also by David Lynch. It's my favorite David Lynch movie, Blue Velvet, a movie with much less ambition than Mulholland Drive, which is more like a magnum opus kind of movie. Blue Velvet is to me the perfect small movie, like a crime story that's told very concisely, and where you can really see a master discovering all, you know, his masterfulness, because this was kind of, well, it wasn't his first movie, but this was really when he found his style, when David Lynch really found his style, and you can watch him as a director discover his own genius with that smallish kind of movie. And it's also his most funny movie, and again it's also a bit of a hangout movie, I would say. The next movie is my number 1 movie of all time, and this combines many of the things I said about several movies in this video. First off, it's a kind of a strange hangout movie, not a fun hangout movie, but it is a hangout movie because it's so epic, and you can get lost in it. It's also a movie about about dream states or psychedelic states. You know, it's one of those surreal movies where you don't really know what is real, what isn't real. It's a movie that combines history and and not World War II, but war. It's my favorite war movie also. History, but also with fairy tale kind of aspects. It's also a satire. Again, it's one of those satire movies where the American dream and the American righteousness gets criticized. It's Apocalypse Now, and I'm going for the Redux version. And also something about this movie that I told you about other movies. It's one of those movies that I haven't really watched many times. I think I've watched the Redux version at least twice, and other versions once or twice, so 3 or 4 times in total that I watched Apocalypse Now. And I want to rewatch it, you know, unlike I Heart Huckabees, where I think like once is enough for me. I love that movie, but once is enough. I will rewatch Apocalypse Now. To me, it's more a movie of like every 10 years or so. Every 10 years, I'm in the mood for it. You know, it's a long movie. You have to take your time. You have to be in a special mood. But you know, in terms of cinematography, acting, the the weirdness, you know, the absurdness also of the way that movie was developed, the development, the production hell of that movie, you know, the myth behind that movie even, that really plays into the movie. You know, you can see the madness of how they made that movie in the final movie. So again, it's also a bit fourth wall breaking in that sense. You know, Marlon Brando, the speech he gives at the end, maybe my favorite movie monologue of all time. Martin Sheen does a great job. He's a bit underrated, I think. Also, his performance in that movie, you know, that's really one of the big performances as a lead actor in a big Hollywood movie I can think of, I think. And yeah, the movie, the music, the way the music gets handled, you know, like all those classical music things, but also pop music, how it gets weaved into the narrative of the film, the things it critiques, of course, and also that it doesn't provide simple answers. You know, it's not like one of those, oh, I'm going to tell you how I see the world. It's not one of those movies. It's a movie first and foremost that asks questions but don't gives any answers. You know, if an epic 10-minute Bob Dylan storytelling song would be a movie, it would be this movie in a way. And yeah, it's my all-time favorite movie of all time. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.